Dungeon Drafters, a deck building dungeon crawling game released in April of 2023 by Manolith Studios. Let's get one thing straight. This game is really cool. I've been having my eyes on this game before it even came out. Deck building games have always been a genre I struggled to get into, but ones I've always wanted to try. And there I was, looking at a game mixing the genre of deck builder with the traditional grid movement turn-based dungeon exploring. Sounds like a pretty good game to get into, at least to me. So, let's get into this. The world of Four Corners is where we find ourselves in Dungeon Drafters. This is a world that was given form by the four archetypes: the Traveler, the Raider, the Oracle, and the Warden. The magical power wielded by these four were later encoded into cards by their followers, the 12 Saints. Through this, the world prospered. That is, until a forbidden fifth archetype appeared, known as the Stranger, with the goal to undo the work of the four archetypes and return the world to chaos. This resulted in a war, ending with the four archetypes sacrificing themselves to seal away this corrupting influence. History became history until more currently, where a man has found his way into a tower, unsealing the magic of the Stranger and once more bringing it on to the world. In response, crusades from all four corners of the world have been set out to seal this magic, in fear that it may potentially cause the end of their world. This results in our characters venturing to this Isle of Doom to once more seal away this danger. Which in-game gives us the goal of exploring each of these dungeons, making it to the bottom of them, and defeating the Guardian present there. After the introduction, we're taken to character selection. I really like the character select screen. It reminds me a lot of those Dungeons and Dragons beat 'em up games where the characters are just chilling around. I always like when character selects are like that. Characters are named purely off the class that they represent: mage, monk, shinobi, brawler, bard, etc. Each character is composed of a starting deck mixing two of the four archetypes. In starting out, I wasn't really sure who I wanted. Like, I thought this rabbit dude was really cool, and I like the idea of a movement-based exploration-heavy deck. But at the end of the day, if you put a big owl dude in front of me, there's no way I'm not going to pick them. I bet a hug from this guy would feel so nice. And I know what you're thinking, Spacey, stop being lonely. And yeah, my bad. But you're also probably wondering why I'm making such a big deal out of this, like, just choose a different character next run. Well, that's because this is actually rather a permanent choice for your save file. There's no changing characters. Who you pick here is who you'll use for the game. So while over time you'll get cards from all archetypes, your starting deck will influence a plentiful amount of early game hours, and that's important to think about. But it's also important to think about who the big huggable owl guy is. All I'm saying is that these are just colorful blocks to me. I don't know what they mean. Monks are usually cool in games, so let's go. Also, to those rushing to the comments at speeds unfathomable, I'm aware that there's a super secret way to change characters, but that only unlocks near the very end of the game and requires you to look up what to do. It's basically an Easter egg hidden in by the devs. With the groundwork of this game laid out, let's talk about the basics. The presentation of this game is truly incredible. This is straight up top tier pixel art. Colorful, stylish, and so many details. Everyone in the hub has a unique appearance and animation. This goes alongside the enemies you face, who even have unique sleep or stun animations that you may not even see. I like how every dungeon has a unique enemy turn announcement, showcasing the enemies that can be found at that dungeon. Hell, even the boss of that dungeon gets a unique enemy turn animation, alongside the player character looking surprisingly badass. Hell, each character even has a unique scene upon waking up from the boat crash. Like, they did not need to do that, but it's really cool they did. And of course, the hundreds of sprites for the cards. I love looking at these. I think one of the coolest things about card games like these is all the unique cards. There's a reason why people collect cards, and seeing all these sprites for every card is awesome. And I mean, of course there's cosmetic foil cards too. The hub area in this game is amazing. It just feels so alive. Like, I feel like I am an adventurer who just set sail to this mysterious island to steal an ancient evil away, alongside others. Some just here to study cards, some here to teach us or open up other services. It just feels very lived in. I love how the time of day changes as you return back from dungeons. Sometimes different weather effects too, like it'll be rainy some days, and it's just a cool ass place to hang out in. On the other hand, this game's soundtrack, every song hits. Not a single miss to be found here. Every dungeon has a different song unique to that floor of that dungeon. And not only that, the music is dynamic too, ramping up when stepping into an encounter. Take a listen. Even the town theme has a dynamic factor when walking into the bar. So cool. Every song is great. I think my favorites are some of the water battle themes, the arena battle theme, and the absolute jazz fest of the tower. Damn, that's heat! I need more jazz music like that in my life. I won't play too much of the song though, because if you're going to be giving this game a try, let's just say you're going to become real familiar with that song. One last thing about the visuals that you all will be seeing a lot in this video are character animations being way too fast and just looking weird. Well, that's because this game actually allows you to straight up increase the speed of the game, whilst also setting a key for an alternate speed, which is pretty thoughtful. I suppose the idea is that you can keep the game at normal speed and then bind a key for fast forward, but by the end of the game, I had by default max speed, with the alternate speed being normal, just in case I wanted to vibe, or see a slow-mo attack, I guess. So yeah, if you're wondering why I'm hyper hopping around through town like that one time I decided to put icing on my cornbread and go for a run, that's why. From visuals to music, Dungeon Drafters proves absolutely top-notch in both. And not to get ahead of myself, but the gameplay is pretty fantastic too. This game is all about exploring dungeons, battling all manner of enemies, and being a deck builder, collecting booster packs to get new cards aligned to the 5 archetypes. Dungeons are made up of randomly chosen rooms with enemy layouts. At the start of combat, players will automatically draw a full hand from their library, or deck. Every turn starts with the player's turn, where they can utilize their AP, or action points. By default, this is 3 actions per turn, but there are some cards that can change this. Actions include moving, using a card, and attacking. Attacking is done by pressing against an enemy. It will do 1 HP of damage. When the player runs out of actions, or holds down a certain keybind, their turn automatically ends, and then begins the enemy's turn. If you were to select an enemy during player phase, you could see which action they plan to perform that turn, which is how you'll get about dodging them, or knowing when it's a good time to strike them. Enemies all have patterns to them, and for example, some will move to attack you, then spend the next turn using some sort of skill that gives you the opportunity to run in and strike. At the start of your next turn, you'll draw 1 card, and that's the basic gist of battles. The enemy design is pretty great, in the way that they each have their own attacks that make them stand out, and create so many interesting scenarios just based off what enemies get mixed and matched within rooms. They each have a strategy, and when combined, it creates amazing strategic gameplay. I love how much of it feels like you're outsmarting the enemies as they try to outsmart you. Like, you can maneuver in a way to make enemies accidentally strike other enemies, and that's the kind of cool stuff that gets allowed from being a grid-based dungeon crawler. Status effects are pretty interesting too. I don't know how many other deck building games do this, but here, statuses are in the form of actual cards, the player being able to discard that status effect at the cost of one of their action points. Dungeons themselves are made up of standard battle rooms, mystery rooms, usually containing some positive or negative gimmick, resting rooms where you can heal yourself and restore the cards from your graveyard, puzzle rooms, which have some sort of challenge or requirement that when fulfilled will open a door to a treasure room, and the stairs room, where you can heal up and prepare for the next floor. Let's talk about the 5 card archetypes in more detail. First up, we have the red cards, known as Raider cards. Raider is all about dealing high damage, whether ranged or up close, jumping on foes, or Izuna dropping them. It's probably the most straightforward one of the pack. Some cards have special effects if certain conditions are met. Raider has a few that allows the player to recast them for major damage, or cards that get buffed if you're low on health. Traveler, or green cards, are a lot more movement focused. Like, you're straight up dashing around the map, striking enemies while you do so, and it's cool. There's a lot of cards here focused on giving bonuses for striking large quantities of enemies, matching the archetype's proficiency of area of effect cards. Sometimes some pretty interesting attack ranges. Positioning is very important with them, and they're pretty fun. Great against groups of enemies, and if you ever feel like you're getting pinned down too often, throw on some Traveler cards to your deck. They can save you in the most perilous of situations. These are also the cards that will grant you extra AP, which is pretty exclusive for the most part to Traveler cards. I'd say Warden, yellow, is the most complicated of the archetypes. It firstly focuses on holding your ground, having cards that consume the rest of your AP to grant bonuses. This is where a majority of the healing cards can be found. I personally find it pretty handy to mix these healing cards if you're running Raider or Traveler. Having sustain is important, especially if you're going to be running in and fighting a lot. Warden has a number of cards also focused on crushing. If an enemy is in a position where they cannot be moved, a crush card that would otherwise move them in a direction will just instantly destroy them. Finally, Warden has gizmos. These are little machines that activate upon taking damage, such as a crossbow or a buzzsaw. This is where the brain enlarges, as the player is encouraged to set up these chain reactions to set off multiple gizmos at once, or manipulating enemies to strike their gizmos. And some of these are very powerful. It just takes a lot of setup, and sometimes you may find yourself getting overwhelmed before you have that chance. Which is luckily why Warden also has quite a number of cards focused on pushing entities, setting them up to be just in the right spot to set off your traps. I love Oracle. These are the blue cards. There's quite a few directions that you can go with these, such as hexing, turning the enemy into frogs. I'm personally a fan of the card that just deletes an enemy, but most prominently, I'd say oracles are all about summoning. Using monster cards to amass an army of AI controlled friends that will take their turn after yours and before the enemy. This is such a fun summoner to play. It's not often in these kinds of games that you get to play this sort of character, and in a deck builder no less. It's very cool. And you should play Oracle because it's novel, and there might not be many other games like this where it's possible. Oracle also has a focus on charming enemies, alongside making copies of cards, and even copies of enemies to fight alongside you. Enemy charming is pretty strong, because if all enemies are charmed, the fight ends. So rooms with enemy summoners can be instantly cleared if you just have the right cards drawn. There's a lot of big brain things that you can do with Oracle. It's kind of the work harder, not smarter, considering raiders can just smash their heads into things. Oracle is a lot more of a methodical game of control. I think my favorite card with Oracle is the life swapping one, which lets you exchange the HP of 2 entities, not including you of course. And the amount of plays with this goes through the roof. You could send out a weak 1 HP summon, then swap its HP with a high HP enemy, and suddenly get a super summon in a really weak enemy. Watch this play. I used a card to copy this boss, yes, you can copy bosses, and then swapped its HP with a nearby enemy, and they became super tanky. And no, of course you can't swap HP with the boss. Or peep this play, where I used this card that summons a fish that gives the lure status effect, forcing that enemy to run up and strike it, and then I swapped its HP when the summon's health was low. That was one of my first eye-opening moments of this game. I think my favorite thing about the summons is that they're respectful. When you copy or charm an enemy, that copy gets all of the enemy's attacks. Even bosses will retain their mechanics. Like this boss here, where the crowd will heal them every turn, they also healed the summons too. They don't take any shortcuts like, oh, the summoned version of the enemy has less attacks or something like that. Like if I charm a summoner enemy, it will begin to summon friendly enemies. I feel like so many other RPGs would just cheap out and make the charmed enemies run into each other. But here, it actually makes you consider who would be the best enemy in a situation to charm. I love that. I think this is one of the funnest summoner experiences that you can have in an RPG. The monk character starts with both Warden and Oracle cards, giving a nice showcase of being able to heal your summons. This is my most played archetype. Oracle just has a lot of tricks up its sleeves, and I like how much you have to react to the current battle, manage your enemies and allies, knowing when you can charm your enemies to your side, and knowing when you should focus on spawning more allies. There's just a lot of thought that makes these battles feel even more dynamic than they already are. The final archetype is, well, purple, the Stranger. The Stranger is the oddest of them all. In story, the Stranger's cards have begun to show up in booster packs, representing its slow corruption. There's even an NPC in town who will cleanse you of all of your Stranger cards and give you money for them. I really like the story aspect of the Stranger versus the 4 archetypes and what's unraveled about them, but also what the Stranger represents. It's not just chaos, it's freedom from the rules. Quite a few Stranger cards are labeled as taboo, and that's because they're able to do things that straight up is impossible with any other archetype. They break the rules and encourage creativity, and also some good old luck based fun. Style wise, they really seem like everything. They have the damage of raiders, the movement of travelers, the healing of Warden, and the summons of Oracle. Hell, some of their cards are just straight up upgraded versions of cards from other archetypes. As much as I love the Oracle, I think I'm a pretty big fan of the Stranger. It's weird, experimental, and I find it pretty fun. Now with the archetypes out of the way, let's get to the actual deck building screen. The most important thing to begin with, before we even start placing cards, is right up here. These are rune slots. There's runes for each of the 5 archetypes, and some bonus ones that can change other aspects of the deck. So, just place 1 rune of each archetype and let's go, right? Well, take a look at this. Every card has a rune level. These represent how many runes you need to have equipped to be able to use that card. Like if you want to use my Chibis King Slime here, which, kneel, my gamer, you're going to need 5 Oracle runes. This also represents the most powerful cards of the deck, the player needing to commit more of their rune slots if they want to be able to wield the strongest aspects of one archetype. The other notable thing to be equipped are the curios. These are very important in rounding out the kind of build you want to make, and basically offer additional effects. I like this one on Raider that if I were to use a card, then at the end of my turn I unleash a square of 2 damage around me. Or this one Oracle one that lets me copy cards I previously used that turn, so I can always have my most useful cards on hand. This curio that charms poisoned enemies is pretty nice with the Stranger cards. A Traveler card that I like is this one that lets me draw cards if I use movement cards, allowing me to always have cards on hand. This one here that just does 2 damage to a random enemy every turn is very strong if you want to play like a Pop-Tart and just sit around. Hella chillin'. Curios can be received by quests from the different masters of each archetype back at the hub, but are mainly gained from paying this gamer to go on expeditions to different places, where they'll be gone for a time and then return with a new curio. Another way to get curios is through the arena. This is super optional content focused around different challenges, such as puzzles, where the player has to use their cards given to them to defeat all enemies in one turn. These are pretty neat, and can often showcase certain archetypes. Like this one for the Warden really opened my eyes to how the archetype could be played. Besides enemy gauntlets, one of the other things that players can do here is draft gauntlets. Yeah, I was wondering where the drafting part of the title comes to play, and well, it's here. This is where you'll be able to choose from a set of random cards from each archetype to build a makeshift deck. And if you make it through the encounters, you keep the cards. It's neat in the way that the only reward you get from doing this are the cards you choose. So you want to try to use cards that you don't have much of, or cards that you just don't have. And this makes for a pretty neat way to experience them. And you can just make some hella fun builds here. Like this one I had with stranger cards, where I would just spam this attack called Queen's Arrival, and then bring them back from my graveyard. It was a really fun build that I wouldn't be able to do in normal dungeons, due to the lack of cards refilling after every couple of rooms like the arena has. The most valuable part of these draft challenges is getting rarer cards. Cards do have rarity tiers to them, and the rarer cards can't be bought at the card store, which can be used to obtain cards that you already own. So now that we have everything set, we can explore the 5 major dungeons, each sporting their own enemies, obstacles, and bosses. The game has an open approach to which one you tackle first, but for every dungeon you complete, the other dungeons get more difficult, due to the increasing miasma, making rooms spawn in extra stronger enemies, alongside sometimes disallowing the use of card regain and healing statues. So maybe it's not a good idea to save the dungeon you struggle with the most last. Speaking of struggling, let me get into my more negative thoughts of this game, and have quite a bit to say, so bear with me. I found this game to be pretty hard, which is expected. As I said, I'm not the best at this genre, and I don't want to look up any decks that other people built. But I feel unsure about how the difficulty is handled. This may be a skill issue of me and others that share this sentiment speaking, but I feel like it's straight up not possible to win dungeons with certain decks. Not even certain decks, complete archetypes just can't even function. It's kind of expected for you to waste 30 minutes entering a dungeon not knowing that you've already lost with the kind of deck you've built. You can spend all this time being creative and dealing with all the enemy encounters, only to reach the end of the dungeon and basically be told that you didn't use the right kind of deck they wanted you to use and be sent back to the hub, everything taken away from you. Dungeon Drafters is a brave game, and I find the way it tackles its ideas have proven to be rather misunderstood in some areas. It's a puzzle game, one that asks the player to study these dungeons, these bosses, and after expectantly losing, going back and seeing how they can solve that puzzle. I remember the first boss I fought was the one on the sunken ship level, the Squid Gamer. After getting pushed in a pit and being forced into a boss fight I would otherwise be too afraid to fight, with naught but 1 HP, I persevered, and encountered a boss that I straight up couldn't beat, a DPS race which a summon build could never stand a chance at stopping. Maybe if I had this gamer at the time, but seeing all my status cards doing nothing to this enemy frustrated me. I remember writing down in my notes that the boss fights in this game are atrocious. I stuck with that same opinion I had seen many others say on this game, that bosses should be weak to status effects. I agreed, writing down that if your bosses are going to resist status effects, then just don't put status effects in your game. Not too long after this, I fell down another pit in the ice dungeon, accidentally ending up on the boss floor once again, and very ill prepared. After the last boss I fought, I expected to once again be in another no-win scenario, just impossible. But no. The boss summoned a lot of enemies that I could control. I made a copy of the boss and life swapped it with one of these powerful summoned enemies. And the game suddenly changed, with me having to dodge both the boss's attacks and my copy of the boss's attacks, who low-key I sometimes wondered whose side they were really on with the team damage they were pulling out. Regardless, my deck was perfectly built for this encounter. Farther success found its way when I ended up at the Sand Dungeon, and very luckily beat the boss there as well. I still don't think I should have, but I just got the right cards at the right time. So wanting to take my win streak to 3, I headed to the fireplace to show the boss what's up, and this happened. The ground became lava, my summons would instantly die upon touching it, and the boss would knock my summons away, stopping them from dealing damage. This boss was immune to all my statuses, sleep, charm, even lure, something that the previous bosses I fought were susceptible to. I didn't have the high DPS either, as the boss would heal upon touching this lava, which happened nearly every turn. I could do nothing. My deck was completely useless. All this time I spent building this deck, all this time I spent going through this dungeon only to find out that the game was rigged from the start. I remember being so upset at this, thinking the developers as fools, saying, this problem could be so easily fixed if every boss had summons. This way, all archetypes would be able to win against these fights. But was that really a problem that needed fixed? Was I being too narrow-minded? Well, I decided it was time to build a new deck, started with a Raider Traveler build, headed into the dungeon, and got my ass kicked. I tweaked it a bit for more of a true monk, Raider Warden. As I said, I think Raider needs sustained cards. Went through the dungeon once more, made it to the boss, and this happened. Yeah, Raider just has cards that deal 10 damage, like legit just a card that's a 10 damage shot. If you rolled 3 to 4 of these during a boss fight, you won. Like, just look at this absolute speed run. This boss was made for Raider cards, complete 1v1 fight. But there's no way I could have known. There's no hint at what cards to use in certain dungeons. The best tip this game gives you is this character here, who talks about needing to have different decks per dungeon. 30 minutes to when I first started this game, I remembered reading this dialogue and putting a pin in it, knowing that line may have greater intent. And yeah, I understood it now. There's a reason why this isn't the kind of roguelike with one massive dungeon you need to continuously build new decks to try. There's a reason there are different levels. A reason why not every boss summons, why not every boss is weak to certain status effects. It's because you can't win the game with the same deck. In the way that I saw that lava boss could easily fall to a Raider deck, I retroactively saw that same deck struggling against the ice boss, who would move around and summon many enemies that would be difficult for my deck based solely on 1v1 to handle. Is it really bad game design just because my specific deck build was purposefully and brutally countered by the game? I thought so at the time. But now I must ask if it would be the opposite. Wouldn't it be kind of boring if the same type of deck I made at the beginning of the game could sweep every dungeon? If I was just doing the same strategy over and over again? That's something I've complained about in other games, the solving of combat with one strategy. But Dungeon Drafters as a game encourages the player to master and play with all archetypes. There's a reason we can save decks. A reason that we can do quests for the 5 masters of these archetypes all at the same time, rather than choosing one and being locked out of the others. What would the point of these levels be if these puzzles could all be solved with the same exact flowchart? Instead, the game asks for you to survey the land, understand what you're going up against, and counter it. I tried that water level I first went to so long ago with my Raider Warden deck and got demolished. Realized that I kept getting outranged and outmaneuvered, while also knowing the boss of this level splits into mini clones. I sought a Traveler deck based around movement, projectiles, and poly hits, and I absolutely destroyed this boss. Just straight up farming poly hit recasts. I'm not even kidding, I didn't even take any damage. The intent is understood, but the intent of those who hate on this game is understood as well. It is arguably a huge ask of the player to spend lengths of time going through dungeons just to fail, losing all they collected in the process. It's unfair, and as a design in itself, can be argued as flawed, because we live in a day and age where people very much so value their time, especially someone like me. But at the end of the day, I respect it. The developers didn't see this as a flaw, they saw it as part of the gameplay loop and treated it as such. And I guess what more do I love than when games go against the expected design? Obviously these bosses could have been made to accommodate all archetypes. It's clear that these developers are very well aware of what these classes can do, which is why they're able to craft dungeons that stop them so well. I can appreciate that Dungeon Drafters wants to break away and stand as its own game, unfazed by the past and the present, and only by what the developers wanted to create, how they wanted the player to master all 4 of these fun archetypes in order to take down the very being that sought to destroy them. So I thusly burn away my myriad of kicking and screaming reactionary complaints coming forth from the bin-growing experience of nicer games and the higher standards we hold in for them accommodating our needs. And with it, what was left was respect. And a single complaint I personally hold as genuine, one towards the entirety of this game, that I believe holds it back. And if it was to be removed or altered, people would like this game so much more. Players shouldn't lose all their treasure, their money, their cards when they die in a dungeon. If anything, maybe half. Because it made me too afraid to try my hand at these bosses, rather just grinding over and over, yet never taking a step. It's only when I found myself repeatedly forced to face my fears against these bosses by falling down unfortunate chasms where the game opened up to me more. And I don't think the game should punish the player for wanting to explore by taking away their progress, taking away that opportunity to become stronger. There shouldn't be a risk in a game that encourages players to solve their puzzles. I suppose this resetting nature of losing items is a staple of these sort of dungeon crawling games, but it gets in the way of what I find to be this game's vision and puzzle solving aspect. It's actually kind of gross how dying in a dungeon wipes all of your progress, losing entire hours of it. There were so many strong and cool cards I never got because when you die, you just lose everything. By the end of the game, I felt pretty underpowered, and it just feels awful. It's bad enough to get your deck countered, but then to lose everything? It's so discouraging. I can't even come back stronger. Stuff like that just makes people want to drop the game. It's funny because I feel like a staple of roguelikes is a secondary feature outside of the main gameplay to upgrade yourself and unlock new things for the next run. But here, you either win it all or you lose it. It just makes me not care for loot in dungeons. Like I'm sitting here doing this pretty neat fishing minigame like, sweet, look at all this money I'm about to lose. It feels rather disrespectful that right before the final boss, there's a save that lets you leave the dungeon with all your loot. Especially when the final boss itself is kinda whack. Like the boss has this attack that just kept one-shotting me, and when you die to the final boss, you have to spend like an hour climbing back up. And I just kept getting one-shotted by this apocalypse attack that even when looking at the enemy's attacks, did not tell me what it did. It's an unavoidable attack that just ends the run. So the final boss uses stranger cards. I looked up all the stranger cards on a wiki and found out that this apocalypse attack was a card that deals damage to everyone depending on how much damage they dealt that turn. A big mechanic of the final boss can only be found out if you know that card they're using or you look it up. Which I don't know. Maybe I would have had that card if dying didn't take away everything from you. This is definitely the kind of game that wastes your time. I feel like it's overly aggressive in a way that's pretty discouraging, like the game doesn't want you to succeed. And sometimes the intent is just off. Like, I remember being pretty frustrated with the tutorial boss. It's a forced lost encounter that you battle pretty early on, but you don't know it's a forced loss, and it was annoying because I felt like I was doing something wrong, as the boss destroys you by giving you 2 petrify status cards, and at the time I was confused why discarding the petrify card would just give it back to me. Like, there was no way by this point in the game I had any understanding of how discarding worked. I thought it was like a separate action and I was doing something wrong. And looking it up now, I'm not the only one. It's not that big of a deal, but it leaves a real sour taste in your mouth so early on with this game. And that's a shame because I think Dungeon Drafters is a fantastic game in so many ways. But just know that for the amount of content this game has, a lot of it is just going to be repeating the same dungeons and leaving early so you can keep your cards, which results in a game that is very much so lengthened in ways I personally find unnecessary. And in the current age we live in now, it really is asking a lot of the player to not just drop the game after getting countered by a boss and losing everything. But as I said, I respect this game and how the devs wish to present it. At the end of the day, these videos are just my opinion, and I'm pretty certain that despite all I've said, a good amount of people probably did run through this entire game with just one deck. But hey, even with my struggle, I do heavily recommend this game, because I had an absolute blast with it. This game captures that essence of joy you get from carefully creating a deck and watching it all synergize and play. That's the best thing about deck builders. And shoot, I won't lie, there were times playing this and messing around with all the cards that I was like, dang, should I even play any other deck builders? This might be the peak. Which of course I will, but I do love this game. Even if you drop out midway, you get to experience some absolute best of deck building in a genre of a game that makes it pretty unique, and allows for so many well-designed and inventive scenarios and cards. Every card just made my mind run with the possibilities of it. It's pure gaming in an incredibly sounding and beautiful world, with a multitude of mechanics that just all play so well into one another that it is awe-inspiring. I really wanted to talk and experience this game, because I feel like it's a little misunderstood. From what I heard, it did not have the best launch, but Manolith have seemingly patched out most of the issues. It's just that this is one of those games that you could tell with every aspect of it, the people at Manolith Studio really created something they loved. So hey, if anything I said or shown off today looks like something you'd like, then go for it. This game really is as fun as it looks. Have a good one, y'all. I'll catch y'all on the next run. Hey everybody! If you want to see my videos a week early, like special Golly Gamer tier supporter Ken Chiago, thanks as always, then consider supporting me through YouTube memberships. I'm really glad that so many people have jumped the ship and started supporting me here. It's just a lot more neat, and hopefully more people can support me and watch my videos a week early and allow me to create more videos. So yeah, I'm already ready to head off to the next one, so thanks for watching, y'all. I'm out of here.